Peace. It is I, Energy Master, aka the Emma, and you are watching the Leopard in the Mirror Canticle of the Mutant Guardian lecture series. We are on Canto VIII and still in Book 1, The Descent of Knowledge. And today's canto is called Build or Destroy, the Architect of Mirrors, Episode 10. If you haven't already, make sure that you subscribe on YouTube. As always, I'm recording these live on Facebook first and then scheduling them to be posted on YouTube. All right, and if you don't already have the book, The Leopard in the Mirror, Canticle of the Mutant Guardian, is available on Amazon. Make sure you cop that, catch up on the previous videos if need be. We're going to go ahead and jump into this one. I will read through the canto as usual, and then at the end, we'll break it on down. Okay. Canto VIII, Build or Destroy, the Architect of Mirrors. The world did not end that day. It opened, and from its womb, wind poured like a hymn. My body grew hollow of effort, not pain, but the mercy of surrender. Something unseen pressed me backward, guiding my fall to earth. I knew that touch. Small hands, my son's, as if he'd come to lay me down upon the lap of God. I turned my gaze to sky. The clouds, obedient, parted, spinning faster than their kin, and from their bright unraveling, a hand appeared, vast, articulate, deliberate, pointing to the right. Rain kissed only my face. The sidewalk stayed dry, as though heaven traced a single line between us and the unseen. Later they found him, where their finger had aimed, at the border between water and light. Then came the giant, no vision, but a knowing. The people below, the searchers, moved as one body, their breath, their fear, their prayer, woven into a single current. The air itself turned visible, the ether of communion. And in its towering symmetry, I saw the form of Amadioha, not above us, but through us. His will made limb by limb through human hands. Then I knew, power is not command, but coherence. To build is to breathe with creation. To destroy is to clear the path for breath. Ego breaks, spirit circulates, and the cosmos hears itself again. Later came the storms, Beryl, Helena, Milton, threefold enunciation of what I had felt, the balance of sorrow and order. They tore the coast of gold and glass, yet spared the humble soil of home. The earth remembers who speaks her name with reverence. And I understood, build and destroy are not opposites, but the inhale and exhale of the infinite. Justice is not wrath, but resonance. When the self dissolves into the whole, a whisper becomes thunder, and the world answers in the language of storms. All right. Yep. I knew that was about that. All right. Let me go ahead and bring it up to the top. Okay. So this one is a challenging one, but I'm good. Fortunately, since my son's passing in September of 2024, it's 2026 now, so we've had a little bit of time to process and grieve. And, it just so happened that, leading up to those events, I had been engaged in, training that deals with, being able to not just have peace of mind, but to be able to be with life as it is and the challenges that come along with it. So I didn't know what I was preparing for. I don't like to think that, all of that was just to lead up to that event, because, a lot of things happened after that, a lot of growth and, impact on the community and different things of that nature. But I instantly recognize how, even when we don't know why we're doing something that's, good for our health, good for our minds, good for our bodies, good for our spirits, it's preparation without necessity for a specific target, if you will. That's to say, if you're training every day, if you do find yourself having to fight or being in a battle or whatever else, you're already prepared. It's not a preparation that you have to try to do, on the spot. It's just something that's already there. And so as we go through this, I'll kind of give you the context, because I want to say, as far as the overall Canticle goes, this is probably one of the most literal. In the descriptions are very close to home with regards to what occurred, what I felt during that time, and things of that nature. So this is I'm glad that you're here to hear this, share this. If you're somebody who owns the book, just the idea that my son's memory, can live on through something like this. And and I had been working like this version of the book. It didn't even become an idea to model it relative to the Divine Comedy. That wasn't an idea until much later after those events. But I had been working on a book. I didn't know exactly what it was going to end up being, but I'd done like maybe 2 iterations of the book, like doing so much research and just doing all sorts of things. It's basically how I kept my mind. I had 2 small children, both on the autism spectrum, and it was a lot. Each of them had different therapies, and there wasn't really a lot of time to just do something or anything that how could I put it, that that felt like working toward a purpose. My purpose became my children, and and then a lot of people, they admire those things, but at the end of the day, you want to. It's great that you're there, but you also want to try to build something that your kids can inherit, and that they can feel proud of, even when you're gone, and things of that nature. With the way things were during that time, it was fairly difficult. And it wasn't something that I just kept bottled up to myself. I expressed these things, but sometimes there's different expectations, placed on men than the reverse in those roles. But that's neither here nor there. I felt like life prepared me for a lot of those things, but I'm not gonna sit up in that like it wasn't challenging. But I say all that to say is that the book, it probably just would have perpetually kept on, building up. I'm talking about like each time, like I wrote up to like 1,000 some odd pages, and then start whittling that down and figuring out what, and then I either learn something or something would happen. I'd be like, okay, well now, not a complete change in direction, but now I have more clarity on what this thing is kind of shaping up to do. It wasn't me sitting down and being like, oh, I want to write a book on this particular thing. It was me seeing something, being present to something that was happening in the research, and then trying to my best to articulate um and capture that, in the writing. So it was like largely academic. It was actually, so the work originally, the project was Inside Black God, and I feel like there was a subtitle, but I can't remember. But the whole idea was to test the hypothesis of the black man is this guy whose proper name is Allah, arm, leg, arm, head, which is expressed by the 5% and the NOI and all of this. It's, if you just take something on face value, then it's just more religion, more doctrine. But I wanted to show and prove through various avenues of research how that statement could be justified. It doesn't mean that the black man is a replacement for the Judeo-Christian conception of God the way you may understand it, but to understand what is meant in that context when it is said, and to determine whether or not, going like a fine-tooth comb through, the scriptures and all the various old writings of the ancient world to see if they were really saying the same thing, but we just project our modern day interpretation of the statement, based on, how we've been conditioned rather than what was actually being said. So that was pretty much the core of that. And it was very academic in nature, but if I had continued on that particular route, it probably would have never gotten done. Quick side note. So summer vacation has started, and so my daughter is with me all day long, and so I don't get the opportunities to record as often, like in the middle of the day, and then, kind of have to wait until my wife gets home in the evening. So so Callie is looked after and whatnot. So that's why I'm recording so late in the evening. If you're watching live, just to let you know what that's all about. Okay, but anyways, but the inspiration, like after everything happened, there was different things that I had encountered, and then I realized, once I learned the context of the Divine Comedy, like why it was written, I was already familiar with it in terms of, how it pretty much has informed writing and all sorts of materials that talk about the structure of heaven and hell. Like, it's largely always based on the Divine Comedy descriptions. Like, the cosmology there is pretty much very central to most people's idea in at least the Western, or maybe you could say European world, with regards to the structure of heaven and hell. And although I was familiar with it in general, I was not completely aware of the context of why it was written, the impact it had, and the things of that nature. So in learning some of that, I realized that it overlapped with a lot of what I was, the things I was looking at, where they were pointing toward, and, what I wanted to be able to do for the community and the world, and just all of these things. And so it just became a perfect match in that regard. Okay, so the world did not end that day. It opened, and from its womb, wind poured like a hymn. So one of the realizations I had, like the day after the incident, was that everything, for the most part in the world, went back to normal. People went back to their jobs. The crowd had dispersed. And it was oddly familiar in the sense that every now and then I remember like having, and maybe this I'm just never talked about it to anybody, but maybe you've had this experience before too. But I'd have these dreams where I'm either maybe I'm with like a crowd or a group of people or something like this, and then all of a sudden it's like the room or the area I'm in, it's just like empty. All of a sudden, just this feeling like whatever narrative or continuity was happening with the dream, it's just like there's just like an abrupt stop, a clearing, and then I'm just in that area by myself, and maybe I go to another area. I don't know, but it's just feeling that clearing. And then while I'm saying that, maybe that's what happens in dreams, and we just don't realize it when you transition it from one dream to another. But maybe they just unfold kind of like a movie. And then once that you know section of the movie is over, maybe people just clear set, and then you and then you just move on to the next scene, like it just flips straight to the next scene. But we normally just aren't intended to remember that part. I don't know. But I just say that once again to say that that's kind of how this felt, what I'm describing, where it was just like, I guess you kind of expect the world to just stop spinning, or I don't know what it is. It's like, I'm more mature than to assume that, but I completely understand if and when somebody feels that way. But it was just interesting to just kind of notice, like, people go on with their lives, they go on living, and you're left to kind of carry that weight. But let's see, and from his womb wind poured like a hymn. So this was the week of a big storm, as you'll see later in the Canticle. My body grew hollow of effort, not pain, but the mercy of surrender. Something unseen pressed me backward, guiding my fall to earth. I knew that touch, small hands, my son's, and if he'd come to lay me down upon the lap of God. So, yeah, so this part's pretty literal. When, so I was already generally, like I was saying earlier, I was already kind of generally exhausted, and that was usually my just default state because I was with the kids, or in the vicinity of the kids all day, every day. And so this particular day, both of them had gotten sick. They both had colds. So instead of the norm where I would drop Kalia off at school and then it'll be, just mainly me and Shamar together until I went to pick her up and take her to a therapy and things of that nature, that kind of gives you a break. It's not that chasing two rabbits sort of thing or whatever. I would, so this particular day, both of them are home. It's been a long day. Shamar got up way earlier than normal. And then, he wanted to just follow his mama to work. She was leaving, and then he was crying for her, wanted her to pick him up and all of this, and he was probably irritable because he had been sick overnight and everything else, and then but she left, and so I went and I laid down with him for a little while, and then put him on my chest because I said that's how he would sleep when he would sleep with me, and then rest for a little bit, and then he gets up, and then Khalil gets up, and it's back to the races. And so during this time, it was particularly a lot of stress and pressure because the apartments themselves, they had threatened to put us out at one point, you know, for they either be a mess or so the kids coloring on the wall or something like this, and so we would clean up, but it would be like during the weekend and stuff because it was just impossible, you know, during the week. And so at the end of the week, you know, that's when you get out the bucket and the sponges, whatever else, and go ahead and reset for the next week and whatever else. But they were extremely, when they were young, still potty training and taking the diaper off and sometimes painting with that. You know, if you're a parent, you know what I mean. All of that. And so it was just, so when they, by them adding that, they coming to start doing monthly inspections and all that, they just added this extra pressure, you know, to try to figure out, you know, how to get the place clean and different stuff like that while taking care of everything else. And so anyway, it was a long day. In the midst of that, he managed to slip out while I was tending to Aaliyah, and so all of that ensued, and all the search and everything else that was going on went on from about 2 or 3 in the afternoon all the way to between like midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning and stuff. So we're talking like nearly 12 hours straight of being in that. And but even before then, just that initial rush of running outside and trying to figure out both where to take Khalil, keep us somewhere safe so I could look for him. Like it's even hard to talk about right now, just that feeling, because it literally felt like I needed to figure out how to split myself in two to do both things. Like I needed to figure out a way to have a shadow clone or something. I needed to split in half in order to be able to do both. But so I just had to accelerate it, just move more rapidly and everything else. So long story short, it came to a point where I just literally was standing on the sidewalk and like I just couldn't, even if I had it in me mentally to keep going, my body was just like, nah, you're done. And so I just kind of collapsed back on the sidewalk. I just crumpled up a piece of paper and just kind of laid out on my back, just whoop, like this, instead of straight at the sky. And then, and so there was this. So it was a moment in that where I realized I had done all I could possibly do as a person and a parent in that moment, and there were professionals and different people around that needed to be able to do their job. And because there was so much on me, and because I was accustomed in other, avenues of life in having to take things on myself, or choosing to take things on myself in a lot of cases, there were times few and far between where I felt helpless. Very, very few times in life where I've ever felt just helpless. But in that moment, I learned to let go. Like there's just certain parts in life that you don't control. And and saying that, looking back in retrospect, like it's probably one of the things that laid the groundwork for, my discoveries in more recent times, where, when you get quiet and you sit still and you quiet the mind, you start to notice all the things that your body is still doing even when you're not the one actively controlling it. You still got your heartbeat going, you still got your breath going, you still got blood circulation. There's so many operations going on in your body. So it seems like stillness from the outside, but it's really an entire universe moving and synchronized. It's an entire ballet, it's an entire symphony inside of you, but we're always so busy and moving about throughout the day that oftentimes we don't even notice the symphony that's going on inside of us. And more importantly, we don't notice when there's some sections playing bad notes, or there's some instruments that aren't even playing at all. And that's essentially how health problems come to play. But, if you take the time to quiet yourself and just listen to it and get interested in that and understand the movements, then it's easier for you to preempt some of that. And so, but anyways, I just, as they say, let go and let God. Let go and allow that part of you that you don't control to do what it does. And then, so you would think, like with 5%ers, this notion of the black man being God, I self Lord and Master, you would think that would mean that there is no acknowledgement of higher aspects. But it's quite the opposite. It's to say that those aspects aren't something separate from us. They're just aspects of ourselves that it wouldn't even make sense for us to try to control. And that's like the example I always give, where if you personally had to beat your heart manually, like you every second, every beat, every pump, if you had to do that with your thoughts, or it doesn't happen, then most of us would be dead very early in life. Like we get distracted by something else, forget to beat our heart, and then that's that. But fortunately for us, there are operations that are associated with our more universal self that continue to spin and to do what they do, even when we're not even aware that it's happening, and don't necessarily need our egoic individual influence in order to occur. Something unseen pressed me backward, guiding my fall to earth. I knew that touch, my small hands, my sons, as if he'd come to lay me down upon the lap of God. So when I initially, let me clarify. So when I initially collapsed down, it was just like, I was still like sitting up a little bit. And it literally felt so whenever my son was ready to go to sleep, so what he would do, so I'd be up. Like after Courtney and Khalil would go to bed, I'd be up a little bit, so I could try to work on something or whatever else. And Shamar, he liked to watch his shows on Disney Plus and all of that, and so when he was ready to go, like I never had to make him go to bed. When he was ready to go to sleep, he would come in there, he would grab me by my hand. It didn't matter what I was doing at the time. He like, I am ready. He come and he would pull me in the and then he would want I'd sit down and he would get on my lap, and so he would climb up on me, and then he would push me back. He'd push my chest. If he had to, he'd push his head into my chest, his hand, and man, he was a strong little joker, man. He had a super muscular build for his age. Like I was always just in awe with how fast and how strong he was, even for like a 2-year old. I was like, man, the mama didn't want him to play football when he got early, and I was like, man, let that man at least do flag football or something. But my granddad, he didn't want me playing football. Like I was fast too at the end of middle school, and I wanted to play in high school because all my friends were gonna play, but he didn't want me, getting banged up, and they felt I had I was smart and things like that, and didn't want me wrecking my brain with concussions and all of that. So I was kind of diverted from that, but I wanted him to at least have a choice and see if he liked it. We could find other sports, whatever else, but I felt like that'd be great for him. But his mama didn't want him to do that. But anyways, so he pushed me back onto my back, and he lay on my chest, and so when I was sitting on that sidewalk, it felt like my whole midsection just disappeared. Like I just didn't have a section between like the top of my chest and then the lower half of my body. Like it felt like it just disappeared, and it felt like his little hands pushed me back on my back. So I laid on my back. Excuse me, y'all. My eyes burn. I never. I was able to cry before that. It wasn't like I just cried often, but I was at least in touch with my emotions and stuff enough to where I understood it's better to go ahead and let it out than it is to try to hold it in. You no point in trying to impress somebody, look good for somebody if you got it in there. Even just for your health, you gotta allow your body. This is like you holding it. If you got to use the bathroom, you can mess your prostate up like that. Similarly, if your body is trying to move you to cry and release or whatever, you gotta let that happen. But I never ever had hot burning tears, like tears that actually cause the eyes to sting and then it hurt or whatever else until that day, and then it happens after that. Feel like blood coming from the tear ducts. It's not actually blood, but it feels like it burns like salt water and stuff. But it felt like that. And so I just looked. So I turned my gaze to the sky. The clouds obedient parted, spinning faster than their kin, and from there bright unraveling. A hand appeared, vast, articulate, deliberate, pointed to the right. So as I'm laying on my bed, let me go ahead and say the next part too, because it's sequential. It says, rain kissed only my face, the sidewalk stayed dry as though heaven traced a single line between us and the unseen. Later they found him where that finger had aimed at the border between water and light. And so what happened, and then I can't honestly say I've ever seen something quite like this happen before. But so as I'm laying back now, so it's a relatively clear day at this time. It's a little sunny. I don't remember it being super hot because it was kind of transitioning from into autumn and stuff. So it wasn't. I can't remember whether it was hot or not. But I remember it was relatively clear. And so as I'm looking up in the sky, it's clouds moving. Still some blue sky though. And as I look up at those clouds, so just to give you a little context, we got this huge retention pond like right behind our door, to exit the apartments or whatnot. And so when when I discovered that he had pushed out the screen and hopped out the window, naturally there's things that you hope, but then there's things that are most likely. And so just knowing that the water was there and how much he loved water, I didn't know how. I had a general idea of how long he could have possibly gone, but I also knew how fast he was, so you kind of hope that maybe you don't want him to be hurt, but you halfway hope that he hurt himself enough the way he wouldn't run for that water. It's just so much in that one moment when you realize your child is missing. And so it was mostly after you almost hope that somebody kind, picked them up, but this wishful thinking is just any number of things that you hope happen as an alternative to to that. But I ain't see no signs of them and all of this. And so anyways, by the time I'm laid out on the sidewalk, I look at the sky, and it's two clouds in particular that they're like I guess they're right in front of the sun, sort of, and they're parting, like kind of at the top part, it's kind of parting, and to the left, the cloud to the left, it was shaped just like a hand that was pointing. And see, and I'm an artist, so like I'm detail oriented when it comes to seeing something. So like it legit looked like a hand specifically in position to point. And so I'm not one to discount signs and things like that. I try not to project things on, but at the same time, like I don't want to just discount something. But I was like, that looked like a hand pointing this way. And so I turned my head in that direction, and so the way I was laying, it was the apartment building was kind of in the way, and so I didn't know exactly what it was. Like if it was a sign for something, I didn't know exactly what it was pointing. Like it made me think that it had something to do with that apartment, or maybe the bush, just anything, or whatever else. And so right then, I hadn't even had a chance to formalize the thought, but like it was basically like in the neighborhood, like what are you trying to tell me? Like it was like that. That was kind of, and so when I looked back up toward the sky, a couple drops of rain hit my face, and then I noticed that no rain was falling anywhere else. Like I don't see any on the sidewalk or whatever. Like it was just a few drops, just enough to let you know, yeah, it's raining. It wasn't some other source of moisture. It was just a light enough sprinkle for me to get for it to click and say water like this, and I realized it pointed toward the water. And like I said, it was a long day after that, but they did end up, when they did finally find them, it was like more or less in the exact area where that finger had pointed. And so if there was any, I'm not a doubtful person by any means, but if there was ever any doubt in my mind that there's some certain things that are above and beyond what our typical everyday experience is in this world. Like between like that's just one instance of things that were going on that day that just like, wait a minute, there's something more to this place. Like there's something more to this reality, something more to this life. Like I wasn't necessarily the kind of person that was trying to, find some kind of, I don't know, because I'd had a long, many years, to do that already. I'm about to be 40. It's just I had already had plenty of times to, seek and explore and whatever else. But what I'm saying is, through all of that experience, there was something very real, and you just kind of know something. Like you probably heard people describe similar things, but then until like that thing actually hits you, be like, whoa, like is that what they've actually been talking about this whole time? And so then it says, then came the giant, no vision, but a knowing. So it's kind of what I was just saying. The people below, the searchers, moved as one body, their breath, their fear, their prayer, woven into a single current. The air itself turned visible, the ether of communion, and in its towering symmetry, I saw the form of Amadioha, not above us, but through us, his will made limb by limb through human hands. So Amadioha, I was not aware of this concept at that time, but he just works as a good representation of the experience. And so Amadioha, also known as Igwe in Ordinalis, the spiritual system of the Igbo people of Nigeria, Amadioha represents a group spirit, so he's considered like a sky or lightning spirit, and also serves as the group spirit of a people. All right, so this was something that was relatively common in the ancient world, where you would have like a tribal deity or a national deity and different things like that. And so Amadioha, for the most part, represented the concept itself of the national deity. And so that was applied here poetically to describe the actual phenomenon for which I didn't have a name. And so what happened was, a little after that moment of surrender where I just felt like it was out of my control and relinquished the need to feel like I had to control it, there was this moment where I'm trying to think of something to compare it to. Like, so the people, everybody was doing something. Everybody was doing their job. Like you kind of see this with like maybe a swarm of ants, maybe, where it's like the idea of them being individuals disappears because they're moving as a swarm. And I witnessed this to some degree in other ways. Like I've even kind of seen the swarm happen with Wu-Tang. Like one of the first times, if not, was it probably the first time I ever saw them in concert. It was really a masterclass to just kind of see that many people on stage and still be moving in coordination, like without it being choreography. Just they fellas that have been around each other and working with each other for so long that it's almost like a dance, like how coordinated they were. Like it's something that's very lost from today's hip hop, and something that could only have been forged in the gold and silver era. You know what I mean? So salute on that. But even beyond that, I think like what I saw was maybe the most beautiful dance of people working in unison And if I shed tears here, it's not the same as the the hot tears. That's just me, parent. Like you never get used to loss, but this is on the other side of that spectrum where it's the most beautiful thing. Like I witnessed the most painful thing and the most beautiful thing I ever will probably witness all in the same day. Like that's the extremes have to, I guess they have to balance each other out, but they I it was this coordination, this dance where I've never seen people collectively, like that many people being selfless in their efforts, and it wasn't just there. Like you could sense it there in that particular location, but then after the fact, like just kind of hearing and having people reach out, like all the people who all these people who didn't even know my son, they stopped doing whatever it was they were doing, and they that for a moment they were able to put aside being black or white. They were able to put aside being Republican, Democrat. They were able to put aside all that stuff for my son. Yeah. On one hand, it made me so happy and hopeful for humanity, but just as I saw that next day, to some extent, it didn't, completely go away, but the instant that I felt that, the reality creeped in to some degree that, just the idea of like, why can't we always be like this? Why does it have to be something tragic like this before we're able to just not be so concerned about trying to obtain this thing or trying to be better than that person? Like, why does it take something like that for people to get into their mode? And so that was definitely something, but at the same time it planted a seed in me because I knew it was possible. I knew that the people were capable of it, so it was no longer a matter where people had an excuse for being nasty to each other. It was like, I know what you're capable of, and it's my intent to hold you to that standard. And so but within that dance, I literally I I'm trying to figure I'm still to this day trying to figure out the best way to describe this, but if you think of it in terms of maybe like constructive resonance with sounds, like if you have wave maybe seeing this with like waves in the ocean, where it's like if it's two waves that are like of equal height and energy, whatever else, and then they collide with each other, they actually create a bigger wave. Like they combine to a bigger wave if they align right. So imagine the part of you that gives presence. So when you're in the in the presence of a living person, you can feel that, and you could tell this, like this what's a food you eat, well, even so, all right, I'll use a roach for example, because that's probably a common form of death that a spider or a roach or just a bug or whatever, just to make it easy on you. The instant that that bug is dead, it's like there's this thing in you that clicks, where it's just like it's a shell. Like you know whatever mechanism for motion and just life or whatever was there before, like it's gone. Like this thing has become object. It was being before, and then now it's just object. That's kind of like that sense you get, like it's a switch that switches off. Well, all right. So that thing that makes you feel like a being and not object. Imagine that you're so in sync with the people around you, and it's a large enough number of people around you that whatever an observer uses to detect their presence, it instead detects all of you as one entity. And so they occurred to me as if there was an invisible giant. Like you could feel the pressure of the giant. Like you could feel that it's there, but you just can't see it clearly. Like there was even slight distortion in the space between them, but it was still coherent enough. But it's just that presence. It felt like it formed into a person, a giant person that was like moving them on strings. They were so coordinated. And this isn't like a supernatural phenomenon. Like there's a precedent for this. Like it's sort of brain coherence. Like it happens ritually and in church settings when the correct factors are put in place or whatever, and then they kind of count on you having that sort of experience when you're there, so you'll continue to want to come back, things of that nature. But often, when you talk about the presence of the Holy Spirit and different things of that nature, this is essentially what it is. Like when you and the people around you are out of the way enough for that presence that is embedded within us, that is a drop of the total presence that, in the universe. When y'all get out of the way, that you all can become present to that thing, and then their unity and their oneness, not as something metaphorical, but something that actually feels like entity, like an existence, a living existence. And that's essentially what I sensed that day. So I had the hand in the crowd. There was a literal, visual cue. But then that right there was something intense for me. And then whatever it was, like it felt like, there was, the wind was coordinated. Like it looked like everybody, the trees, the people, everything was in coordination for that specific moment. And if ever I was certain that, again, not even interpreting it as something separate, but the idea that there is a God presence that people in the past detected in some way, shape, or form, and were trying their best to articulate and record in the form of scripture. I'm not saying everything is recorded right. I'm not even saying it was applied right, because some people have abused it. But what I'm saying is, I know when people have seen something and they trying to figure out their best way to explain it, whatever it is, but it was definitely something. But that was one of my confirmations that day, and I was just in a unique position that day to be receptive to it. Moving a single current as self-turned visible. The communion, you basically got the flavor of it. Then I knew power is not command but coherence. So that's what I was just saying about coherence. To build, all right, so build or destroy is the number 8 in the supreme supreme mathematics. To build is to add on to life, and to destroy is to take away from life. So we're building on that concept. So it says to build is to breathe with creation. So this is aligning the concept of um, aligning the concept of to add on to life with to breathe with creation. So there's a cadence, a rhythm to it. And there's kind of a play on words here too, because power is the number 5. And so build or destroy is 8. So 8/5 is the dimensions of your height divided at the navel. So um, below your navel, so if you divided the body into 13 parts, you'd have 8 equal parts below the navel, 5 equal parts above the navel, or whatever. So this is a play on the orderliness of the body here. It says power is not command but coherence. To build, to breathe with creation, to destroy is to clear the path for breath. Right? So to take away from life. So there's certain things that you have to get out of the way so that life can build in the direction that you're meant to walk. And since ego breaks, spirit circulates in the cosmos, hears itself again. So the cosmos is hearing itself through you. That harmonious structure of yours, when your own thought structures are surrendered to your purpose in this universe, you naturally begin to hear and see all that conspires. And that word conspire comes from the same word as, the breath comes from. So spirit, so expiration, spire, that spirit, pneuma is breath, so spirit is breath. So when you're inspired, it's like a spirit comes into you, is essentially what it actually means. But it is breath. And it begins to experience itself through you once you get out of the way, once that ego submits to your destiny. Everything conspires to get harnessed together. Spirits come together around you achieving their destiny. So what some may write off as luck, if you're in coherence with your purpose, that synchronicity that happens is you being aligned with the order that allows those things to happen for you. Later came the storms, Beryl, Helena, Milton threefold enunciation of what I had felt. The balance of sorrow and order, they tore the coast of gold and glass, yet spared the humble soil of home. The earth remembers who speaks her name with reverence. So all right, so throughout the events of that day, there are things that occurred, there are questions that were asked that weren't answered. There were questions that were asked for which I couldn't understand, for, certain people's job or position or whatever it is. I understand, the circumstances of why you would or wouldn't. I get it. But there was a particular very disappointing and deceptive piece of news that I received later on that evening, that whatever hope that I had acquired through seeing that unity of people, it made me so upset that they would do what they did, that I was like, you know what? Go ahead and, get rid of all this. I want to, just destroy it all. Like, there was storms on the way. I said, whatever sense of preservation for this place, let thy will be done. And then I moved my hand along a certain path. Like, I looked out there over this area, and I moved my hand from left to right, weighted along a certain path. Hurricanes came back to back to back over the course of the next couple of days. There was more flooding on my grandparents' street than ever before. Now, when I tell you everything along the path that my hand had traced and nothing else around it was destroyed by those hurricanes, that's insane. But what's even more insane, just me paying attention to what was destroyed, what was left untouched, which was largely like, our neighborhoods, our black neighborhoods, but them folks, rich folks on the beach, boy, they lost some money that week. Oh my goodness. But the most powerful realization was that it didn't occur to me as, oh, I made the storms come and destroy this. It was that in my state of surrender, I was so synchronized with the events that were already probable at that time that my own movements and timing was such that if somebody had been paying attention when I did that, they wouldn't have been able to tell the difference between me just happening to move my hands at the right moment versus me making the storm move. And so it just really gave me insight into, miracles and things that have happened, or at least been, described or reported throughout history. Some more compelling, forms of that happening, like in the case of Simeon Toko in from Angola in Africa. They call him the Black Jesus. This man that countless people reported they see these different folks come in and they would kill him, cut him, whatever else, and then he would just regenerate and get right back up and call on the Holy Spirit, and when, like, all sorts of things. If you've never heard of him, Simeon Toko, where's my marker? Let me write his name, because that is an interesting story. Because there's a lot of stories out there that are oftentimes easy to, kind of debunk or whatever else. But of all the many stories I had, this is probably one of the ones. And that same area, there's a lot of different, occurrences, even some news reports, like weird stuff I done looked at. But if there's ever been some evidence of some of the things that you hear about biblically, but even more impressive, even what's even more compelling about it is that while the way it actually manifests is different from how most people would expect it to, based on how it's been romanticized by institutions, the details that are switched in that regard make more sense than, the narrative that we've come. You're like, whoa, okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, and then that's compatible and coherent with other stuff I had been researching already. Anyway, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I see exactly why they say this particular way versus that particular way. Got it. All right, but Simeon Toko. All right, anyways, yeah. And so as I would learn later about the story of Abraham, so the original story of how he came to recognize the oneness of God was that he was actually a child and was observing the sun, moon, and stars, trying to, figure out, who was in control. And then he saw that the sun sets and the moon sets and, the stars shit like this. None of that stuff is permanent. So it couldn't be the thing that was in control. So he came to the conclusion that there must be something beyond any one of those things that is actually responsible for what's going on. Was the conclusion. And so if you realize that you too are part of that orderliness, then you can understand the concept of there being one God. And the way you take it from there, this, up to you and your level of engagement with it. But most people have been conditioned to think that's something that's distant and far away and separate from you. You are an aspect that is, well, you experience yourself as an aspect that is separate, but at the end of the day, that is essentially an illusion of identifying with the body as a particle rather than as a part of a more complete apparatus, if you will. You're just used to the concept of all your organs being physical ones within the local lattice of your body rather than understanding that there's some energetic structures and organs associated with you that extend beyond electromagnetically from this part of the body. You have systems similarly in Odinala, the same one where Amadioha goes, where they map this very well in a way that is true to your experience and that expounds on concepts that may be a little cryptic and poetic in other systems, but is approached in a more scientific sort of way within the confines of the liturgical speech that they used in order to encode these things in ancient Nigeria. Okay, justice is not wrath, but resonance. So it's like, it's not even that some force is like, oh, you good, you bad, and I'm going to punish this. Once again, I know you've been conditioned that way, but the order is so complete and so structured that it's almost like displacement, where it's just like force in one direction solicits an equal but opposite opposing force, back in that direction. Like, it's literally so well tuned that if you can decouple your understanding from notions of it being somebody casting a judgment, but rather a system that's already established that dispenses said order, if you can look at it that way, then it starts to make a lot more sense to you. When the self dissolves into the whole, a whisper becomes thunder, and the world answers in the language of storm. So that's a reference to the to chaos theory. So the chaos theory and the dynamics associated with that, they describe how small local events can cause a chain of events that can result in chaotic and expanded manifestations. Like, they give the example of a butterfly flapping its wings in one hemisphere, causing the necessary chain of atmospheric events that trigger a hurricane or cyclone in the opposite hemisphere or whatever. And so if you want to understand how that actually works as a mechanism, you can look up power laws in self-organizing or organized, organizing criticality. Okay, or just SOC for short. Okay, so just because of mathematical relationships and the way that fields and the way things grow naturally and all of that, there are certain phenomena that happen particularly when power is concentrated in one area. The finance actually behaves like this, where if a small number of the population controls all of the wealth, it creates like a, it's very similar, like when it's modeled, it actually looks very similar to how a tidal wave forms, where it's like it's water. Like when you have a tidal wave, all right, so you got, so this is normal surface of water, and so it starts to swell, and so what happens is you have energy and force start concentrating on one end of it, so they're sucking all this energy up, and then so you're getting like this growing wall of water that's forming here, and so this energy pulling this way, and so what it does is that it pulls this part of the surface. So this is the actual surface line here, and so as you can see, it's making a line right here relative to that surface that's getting infinitely and infinitely thinner and thinner and long. So we call that a tail. So that's a tail that stretches out right there. Okay, so similarly, when a small number of the population controls sufficiently enough of the wealth, that tail that forms among the people who have not, like the amount of difference they have between each other is infinitely small compared to the amount of difference between all of them versus the 1% with all the wealth. And so what happens is, just like kind of like what I was describing with the phenomenon of the presence with all the people working together that day, imagine that on a scale of millions or billions of people. In actuality, it only really takes about 10,000 people for something to actually catch on and actually trigger the dominoes, in order to make, like, widespread change happen. But when you're talking about millions of people who are in the same state, both economically as well as emotionally or whatever else, when that happens, it causes collapses. It causes them to have a collective field that is able to influence probabilities in a certain way, so to speak. To where that's when people start collectively experiencing what they would, consider to be miracles when it comes to these things. So it's just like a tipping of the scales kind of factor that's embedded mathematically in the design of the universe as a whole. So this is well studied and modeled and applied in various ways, and your awareness of it allows you to be able to apply it in ways that actually benefit. So whenever they talk about power to the people and the collective power of the working class and all this good little stuff, whenever they talk about that stuff, there is a scientific precedent for it, but then understanding it a little better on a mathematical basis kind of gives you an understanding that it's not necessarily that you're doing this thing or that thing, but it's a function of numbers, or a law of numbers. You gotta get the numbers, and you gotta get people moving in the same direction. But if you do so, you literally work like a tidal wave, or the break of a tidal wave. Okay, I think that pretty much covers it. We're gonna go ahead and end it here. I will hopefully be able to record a few more episodes come to set. Oh well, then again, my child does have a birthday party to attend that day, so maybe on Sunday I'll get the opportunity to, stock up, do a few episodes, get those scheduled and whatnot, whatever. But until then, thank you for going through this journey with me. We got quite a few cantos to go or whatever, but then this is one of those early pivot points in the story, important pivot points in the story that takes a lot out of me every time I read it, but by the time I'm done with the book, I am a stronger and more evolved man every single time. And then that's what I hope this work can also do for you in some way, shape, or form. Um, so I'll see you next time, y'all. Peace.